Your notes are officially being subpoenaed by the courts, or some attorney is wanting to reference them and review them due to some legal matters. Are you terrified as a therapist? If so, maybe you know that there's some concerns regarding your notes and your documentation practices that you feel you can definitely benefit from improving. Therefore, I am so glad you found this YouTube channel and as well as this video, in which I'll be providing today 5 tips to documentation that can really put the lawyers away, or at least increase your legal and ethical compliance when it comes to being an efficient documenting clinician, because it's essential to our work as therapists. And with that being said, I will start talking about some of those tips, starting with the number 1. You are documenting every interaction you have with a client outside of sessions, and I mean every single interaction. If you end up meeting your client at, let's say, the store, and you talk a little bit, maybe they say hi to you, maybe they introduce you to their family members, whatever it is, you want to make sure you document it. They email you about something, even if it's confirming the schedule, document it. They call your office, they maybe text you or send you a message, even if it's just something so short and related to sessions, maybe, hey, I saw this video, can we talk a little bit about this? Document it. We want to make sure every single interaction you have with a client is documented, because it's also keeping a trail track of every form of communication you've had and making sure there's no he said, she said scenario. Because if you're ever subpoenaed, maybe a client reports you to the board, maybe some issue comes up and you're being considered at fault, you want to make sure there's an entire thread, an entire track, or an entire system where you have reported and collected every interaction. So if a client says, hey, on December 5th, I reached out to my therapist and they ignored me, I referenced being in an SI, and they hadn't provided me any form of crisis resources, therefore I reported them to the board, and the board is, did this happen? And the board is inquiring, what exactly did you do? You have an interaction saying, actually, this didn't happen December 5th, this happened December 3rd, here was how I responded, here are the resources I provided. You are making sure you are covering yourself and removing liability from you. And that kind of brings you to tip number 2. Include risk assessment details in every single note. And I mean every single note. I want you to include details of suicidal ideation, suicidal attempt, homicidal ideation, homicidal attempt, non-suicidal self-injury or self-injurious behavior, whatever language that you use, include it in every single note. And here's why. Basically, you're stating that you have done some form of risk assessment, and even if you didn't, at least putting a detail that in this session the client did not report suicide ideation, homicide ideation, whatever it is that you want to include, basically stating that this did not happen. Because let's say a client ends up having suicidal thoughts or engaged in some suicidal action, or perhaps even murdered someone, you have a track record in every single note what their suicide ideation, homicide ideation, or some form of risk assessment has looked like up until that point. So when something happens, let's say police officers, an attorney, someone is coming for you, your documentation, maybe it's being subpoenaed, there is a record trail of each and every assessment that you did, or whether or not the client even reported anything regarding that. So then at this way, you're saying that I assessed them consistently. From my assessment, this is what I found. This is what the client reported. Up until now, there was no risk, or up until now, there was risk and concerns, and here are the steps in which I took. So this way, it's at least showing that you are assessing and maintaining adherence in that way and documenting this risk assessment to make sure that everything is okay, or highlighting when things aren't okay and what you're doing. Did you hospitalize this client? Did you have them go to a crisis house? Did you have to call somebody because there's concerns that they might actually harm other people? Was police involved? Did you contact PERT? Did you do a wellness check? Did you do something? Having that documented can also help you and basically cover you for liability if something actually happens with your client as well. And now on to tip number 3. We want to maintain our credibility as professionals, and one of the ways we can do this is not only capturing every single interaction we have with our clients or documenting all our risk assessments that we're doing, but also making sure our notes are being signed and completed within 72 hours. Obviously, earlier than that is even better. 24 hours is ideal. 12 hours, minutes even after the session is the best, but we want to make sure we're completing our notes in a timely manner, and here's why. Our human cognition only remembers so much information. And if we're trying to reflect on what happened during the sessions, days later, weeks later, we're really losing on how reliable that information is. And attorneys know that, the court knows that, the board knows that. So let's say your notes ever get subpoenaed and you have this really amazing documentation, everything's well crafted, risk assessment is done, but they see it was completed 3 weeks later, a month later. There could be concern that maybe you're just stating things to cover yourself from liability. They might be questioning just how true is your memory, just how honest were you when you were writing this documentation. Is there any proof that what you're writing down actually captures what happened in session? Maybe you're someone who records your session and that's kind of how you're writing your session content. Maybe it's something you can note in the documentation as well or prove to the courts. Nonetheless, by completing your documentation within 72 hours or less, you are providing more accurate details of what's happened in the session, as well as making sure that you're attending to things in an intentional, clear, concise manner. So if you're someone who's maybe completing your documentation by the end of the week, so you saw a client on Monday and you're doing it on Friday, just know that you are putting yourself a little bit more at risk or being seen as a little bit less credible should it ever be subpoenaed or your notes ever being requested. But now we're about to reach 4 and 5, where many therapists are often not actually doing. So up until this point, if you find, oh, I am not doing this in my notes, please definitely make sure up until this moment, with this being step 3, that you are making sure that you are founding a foundation for yourself, doing some form of practice, establishing a routine, doing a checklist, whatever it is, where these top 3 has already been something in your routine, so it's a little bit easier, because the next couple ones actually a little bit more challenging. But nonetheless, thank you so much for tuning in so far, and now here's tip number 4. Tip number 4 is basically documenting the start and end time to the session. Now, I know traditionally, especially when we're using EHR, we have scheduled our sessions for 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., but it's typically within the insurance code, or maybe we're detailing that it's 45 to 50 minutes, but nonetheless, the session has already had a specific blocked scheduled amount of time. Here's the issue with that. That is not necessarily when the session actually started, nor when it ends. So let's say you have a client by the name of John. John shows up to the session 5 minutes late, let's say even 12 minutes late. We'll use the number 12 because it's my favorite number, but also because it really helps be applicable in this sense. So John has showed up 12 minutes late to your session. For many clinicians, they have it still set on the EHR block of 4 to 4:50 because of the 50-minute code or whatever it is. But John showed up 12 minutes late. If your note is not reflecting that, or the time block hasn't indicated that, you are putting yourself at risk of saying John was with you for those 12 minutes. Now, we don't know what John was doing in the 12 minutes until he came into your office. Maybe John just went to a mall and just hurt someone. We don't want to say that John was with us in that 12 minutes, because therefore we're taking the liability and risk stating that John was with us, and therefore we just incredibly created a form of alibi for John if that's something that happened. And same for if the session ends like 12 minutes early. If John leaves your session 12 minutes earlier than when you normally end, detail when he left your office. Because if John leaves your office and therefore like heads right outside and ends his life, you are detailing that John was maybe alive while he was still like in that 12-minute period when he actually left your office, and therefore maybe hadn't engaged in any practices of, active suicidal attempt, or maybe John actually ended up hurting someone and you're detailing an alibi again for him. We don't want you to serve as someone's alibi if that's not the case. Include the start and end time of the session, aka when your client arrives. Even if that means that you don't actually have the full 45-minute session for insurance, even if that means that you don't get to bill your full rate, it's much, much better legally, ethically, and in terms of liability and risks, and even for your insurance, because we all have liability insurance as well, to make sure that you're not covering for someone, because that puts you at so much more risk and harms you and impacts your possible income much more than maybe billing differently for insurance. So making sure that you're documenting the start and end time, adjusting your EHR for that, including it in the note that John arrived 12 minutes late, John left my office at exactly 4:37, whatever it is, just detail it correctly so you're not putting yourself at risk. And on to tip number 5, because it also is related to EHR use. Make sure that you are not using the transfer features on EHR. EHR systems are so incredibly useful. They help us be able to copy and transfer over diagnoses, copy and transfer over mental status exams, copy and transfer over details from previous notes, especially if it's something that we've done before, it's repetitive. But this is actually a significant downfall for many therapists because we are not, one, reviewing our notes that closely, in a sense that maybe they weren't necessarily as euthymic during the session. Maybe they were more sad. Maybe their affect was more blunted. It makes us necessarily less reflective as to what exactly the session content could look like, and it also puts us at risk. So maybe in the previous session we detailed that they were 12 minutes late, and this time around they were 10 minutes late. We're like, give or take. No, we don't want to impact our sense of credibility. We don't want to serve as an alibi again, whatever it is. And also, we have to make sure we're putting into practice that each and every session has its own reflection to it. If we're completely transferring data over, we're not necessarily thinking too closely about what we're saying in the notes. Maybe some things that were shared weren't necessarily the highlighted themes, but we're transferring it over because it's easier. Maybe the diagnosis that we've been transferring over isn't necessarily as applicable to the client anymore. Maybe what we discovered as major depressive disorder before was now maybe more persistent depressive disorder, but we're not thinking about it too much. Or maybe it's actually less. Maybe it's just adjustment disorder with depressed symptoms. And we just want to make sure that we are closely adhering to what the session is about without transferring over, because unfortunately many therapists just continue to use that transfer feature, and because of that there are some mistakes that are often transferred over that has caused insurance maybe not to sign the notes. That is more likely to have attorneys view them as non-credible when they're showing up in court, or when your notes are being subpoenaed or the board is coming after you. They might actually try to see, like, why are your notes all so similar all the time? We want to make sure a fresh set of eyes are viewing each and every note and each and every session content. So if you're someone who uses the copy and paste feature, the transfer over feature, or whatever it is your EHR software is saying, make sure that you're closely attending to them and viewing it discriminately, or just not use it at all and start fresh each and every time. It might take you longer to complete your notes. It might make your documentation a little bit more frustrating, but no, it's going to be a lot easier for you later on to practice legally and ethically, to be more compliant if you're not utilizing it. And there you have it. 5 simple tips in order to increase your legal and ethical compliance through documentation, helping keep the lawyers away, helping make your anxiety at ease if your notes ever do get subpoenaed. I am so thankful you watched this video. Please let me know in the comments if you found the tips helpful. Maybe you can talk about which tips that you haven't necessarily been adhering to, or tips that were new to you and surprising, or all the ways in which you've been using all of these. And perhaps there are some documentation practices that you yourself utilize that I can't cover in this video. Please definitely list them in the comments as well. I would love to hear from you. And again, if you found this helpful, please definitely like, subscribe, and share. And I look forward to seeing you the next time. Wishing you well.